Some engines were built to move trucks. These were built to outlive them. Today, we're counting down 10 classic trucks with engines that last forever. Machines so tough they've outlived their owners, their warranties, and sometimes even the factories that made them. Number 10, Chevrolet CK 350 small block V8, 1973 to 1987. If reliability had a heartbeat, it would sound like the steady, low rumble of Chevy's 350 small block. By the time it reached the third generation CK trucks, better known as the square body era, this engine had already become a legend. Originally introduced in 1967, the 350 wasn't just another V8, it was America's universal engine, refined year after year until it became a mechanical masterpiece of simplicity and endurance. In these trucks, it produced anywhere from 160 to 210 horsepower, depending on emissions rules and carb setup. Not much on paper, but out on a job site or farm road, it didn't need to impress. It just needed to work, and that's exactly what it did every single day. What made it so indestructible was its under-stress design. A cast iron block, simple push rods, minimal electronics. Everything was built to be fixed, not replaced. No complicated sensors, just fuel, spark, and steel doing their job in perfect rhythm. Mechanics loved it because it was a teacher's dream and a tinkerer's playground. You could rebuild it in a home garage with a socket set, a torque wrench, and a weekend of patience. And when parts wore out, which took forever, replacements were everywhere. From dealerships to dusty backroom shelves at Napa, the 350 small block became the most supported engine in America. The result, million-mile stories that aren't urban legends. Fleet trucks, farm haulers, even old delivery vans still running their original engines decades later. They didn't last because they were fast. They lasted because Chevy built them to take abuse and keep coming back for more. Even now, more than 40 years later, you'll still hear that familiar idle at small-town gas stations, at car meets, or in the distance on a back road. A sound that says one thing loud and clear: some engines were built to move trucks, but this one was built to outlive them. 9. Toyota Tacoma 2.7-liter 3RZ inline-4, 1995 to 2004. If the Chevy 350 was America's iron workhorse, Toyota's 2.7-liter 3RZ was Japan's silent samurai, built not to boast but to endure. When the first generation Tacoma rolled onto the scene in 1995, Toyota wasn't trying to win drag races. They wanted to build a small pickup that could cross deserts, climb mountains, and come home running. And this humble inline-4 made it possible. Rated at just 150 horsepower and 177 pound-feet of torque, it didn't sound impressive, but the brilliance was hidden in its bones. A cast iron block thick enough to handle abuse, forged crank and rods, and chain-driven dual overhead cams that eliminated the need for fragile timing belts. It was mechanical honesty at its finest. Toyota's precision engineering did the rest. Tolerances were so tight that many engines hit 300,000 miles before showing measurable wear, and the cooling system, oversized and over-engineered. A godsend for off-roaders running in 120-degree heat. That's why you'll still find these engines idling smoothly in the middle of the Australian outback, the African bush, or the mountains of Colorado. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the 3RZ earned cult status among overlanders and adventure builders. It became the go-to power plant for reliability. There are documented cases of Tacomas crossing 500,000 miles with only routine maintenance, oil, filters, and the occasional water pump. That's it. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. This was the engine you could trust when failure wasn't an option. The one that would start in the freezing Rockies after a night under the stars, or in a scorching desert after a long trail crawl. Even today, 20 years later, the 3RZ remains a favorite swap for rock crawlers and expedition rigs. Not because it's powerful, but because it's relentless. A piece of Toyota engineering that laughs at neglect and rewards loyalty. Number 8. Ford Ranger 2.3-liter Lima inline-4, 1983 to 1997. If the Toyota 3RZ was the quiet samurai, then Ford's 2.3-liter Lima was the blue-collar soldier. Built cheap, built simple, and built to keep punching no matter how hard life hit it. Debuting in the early 1980s, this engine was a carryover from Ford's Pinto and Mustang 2 days, but in the Ranger, it found its true calling. It was the kind of engine that didn't care if you changed the oil late, skipped tune-ups, or used it to tow something heavier than it should. It would just cough, rattle, and keep going. Output was humble, roughly 98 to 112 horsepower, depending on the year. But that wasn't the point. This was an engine designed around survival. Cast iron block, cast iron head, and a bottom end so overbuilt that owners joked the truck's frame would rust away long before the engine quit. By the late 80s, Ford added fuel injection and electronic ignition, turning the old workhorse into a dependable everyday commuter. Yet even with modern touches, it never lost its mechanical soul. Fleet operators loved it, farmers trusted it, and mechanics barely saw it because, truthfully, it almost never broke. There are verified stories of 2.3-liter Rangers surpassing 400,000 miles on original internals, still starting every morning with that familiar buzz. And when one did finally wear out, rebuilding it cost less than a set of new tires. This wasn't a performance motor, it was a promise kept, proof that simplicity and durability could live longer than flash and fame. Even today, in parts of South America and Asia, old Rangers with Lima 4s are still hauling lumber, supplies, and livestock. 40-year-old machines earning their keep like it's still 1985. Number 7. Dodge Ram 5.2-liter Magnum V8, 1988 to 1993. When Dodge introduced the 5.2-liter Magnum V8, it wasn't trying to win awards, it was trying to win back trust. By the late 80s, the Ram nameplate was rugged but aging, and Chrysler needed an engine that could carry the badge into a new era. What they came up with was a quiet masterpiece of old-school durability and smart engineering, the 5.2 Magnum, the spiritual successor to the legendary 318 small block. On paper, it looked modest, about 230 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque in its prime. But numbers don't tell the story. What made the 5.2 special was how it delivered that power, smooth, consistent, and virtually unkillable. Dodge kept the basics that worked, an iron block and heads, a forged steel crankshaft, and hydraulic roller lifters, but added sequential fuel injection, tighter tolerances, and improved cylinder heads that breathed better than the old carbureted 318 ever could. The result was an engine that could idle all day, tow heavy, and still run cool doing it. Contractors loved it. Fleet operators discovered these things would clock 400,000 to 500,000 miles with little more than oil changes and cooling system maintenance. When something did fail, usually a water pump or sensor, it was cheap and easy to fix. But the real secret to the 5.2 Magnum's endurance wasn't in any one part, it was in balance. The compression was conservative enough to run on regular gas. The camshaft profile was mild, reducing valve train stress. And because Dodge didn't chase horsepower, the internals lived longer. This was an engine tuned not for bragging rights, but for decades of service. There's a reason you still see early 90s Rams idling at job sites and plowing snow every winter, many of them still powered by their original Magnums. And when you hear that deep, steady exhaust note, it's like the engine is saying what Dodge owners already know: you can't rush durability. Number 6. GMC Sierra 6.0-liter Vortec LQ4 V8, 1999 to 2006. Some engines are loud about their greatness, others quietly outwork everything around them. The 6.0-liter Vortec LQ4 falls squarely into the second camp. It never asked for attention, but 2 decades later, it's earned something rarer: respect. Debuting in 1999, the LQ4 powered the GMC Sierra HD, Chevy Silverado 2500, and a long list of Suburbans, vans, and work trucks. It was part of GM's third-generation small block family, the same bloodline that would later evolve into the LS Legend, but this version was tuned for longevity over lap times. It made around 300 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque. Not outrageous numbers for a 6-liter, but that restraint was its genius. The LQ4 ran an iron block mated to aluminum cylinder heads, giving it a perfect balance of strength and cooling efficiency. And while other engines were drowning in complexity, GM kept this one simple: no variable valve timing, no cylinder deactivation, no turbos. Just a good old-fashioned, naturally aspirated V8 with sequential fuel injection and a reputation for taking abuse. Fleet managers loved it. The LQ4 became the go-to power plant for vehicles that worked every single day. Ambulances, tow trucks, construction fleets. These engines routinely logged 400,000 to 500,000 miles before anyone even thought about a rebuild. Many went further with nothing more than regular oil changes and cooling system upkeeps. And because it shared DNA with the LS platform, parts availability is still incredible. Need a new head? Aftermarket has you covered. Want to rebuild it stronger? There are thousands of performance parts waiting for you. Even today, the LQ4 is a favorite among off-roaders and engine swappers because it's nearly impossible to kill. You can throw abuse at it, long idles, heavy towing, extreme heat, and it just shrugs it off. Taxi fleets have hit 500,000 miles. Contractors have worn out 3 transmissions on the same LQ4. It's the kind of engine that doesn't just last, it outlasts the vehicle it came in. 5. Ford F-Series 7.3-liter IDI diesel, 1988 to 1994. Before Power Stroke became a household name, there was the 7.3-liter IDI diesel, an engine so stubbornly reliable it made Ford's heavy-duty trucks the benchmark for toughness long before modern electronics ever touched a pickup. IDI stood for indirect injection, and it was built by International Harvester, a company that treated engines the way blacksmiths treat iron: heat it, hammer it, and make it last forever. This was a time before sensors, before computers, before diesel exhaust fluid. Everything about the 7.3 IDI was mechanical. The fuel pump, the injectors, even the timing. If it had compression and diesel fuel, it would run, period. The engine itself was a masterpiece of over-engineering. A cast iron block with thick cylinder walls, heavy-duty main bearings, oversized pistons, and pre-chamber cylinder heads that made it smoother and quieter than other diesels of its time. Horsepower was modest, around 180 to 190 horsepower, with roughly 350 pound-feet of torque. But that torque came in early and stayed flat. These engines didn't chase power, they chased permanence. Fleet operators, farmers, and construction crews adored them. There are documented examples of 7.3 IDIs passing 500,000 miles, and a few that cracked 700,000 without a rebuild. Maintenance was simple: change the oil, keep the fuel system clean, and make sure it never overheated. Do that, and the 7.3 would just keep going day after day, year after year. When the turbocharged Power Stroke arrived in 1994, it was faster and cleaner. But ask any old school diesel mechanic which one they'd trust on a cross-country haul with no backup, and they'll point to the IDI, because when everything else fails, the 7.3 IDI just fires up and growls, "I'm not done yet." Even today, 3 decades later, enthusiasts still hunt down these old trucks. Parts are plentiful, rebuilds are affordable, and the community around them is strong. The 7.3 IDI diesel didn't just power Fords, it powered a generation's belief that simple mechanics could outlast modern technology. Number 4. Dodge Ram 5.9-liter Cummins 6BT 1989 to 1998. When Dodge teamed up with Cummins in 1989, they didn't just release a new truck, they accidentally sparked a revolution. Before this partnership, Dodge trucks were respected but rarely feared. Then came the 5.9-liter 12-valve Cummins, known among gearheads simply as the 6BT, and overnight everything changed. This engine wasn't born in a pickup. It came straight out of medium-duty industrial trucks and heavy equipment. It was an inline-six diesel built for commercial use, the kind of engine that spent its life pulling excavators and running generators, not grocery runs. But once Dodge dropped it into the Ram, the pickup world suddenly had a workhorse that could outpull, outlast, and outlive anything else on the road. The specs were modest by modern standards, 160 to 215 horsepower depending on year, and 400 to 440 pound-feet of torque. But the 6BT didn't care about peak power. Its strength was in its simplicity and engineering purity. It had no computers, no electronics, and no unnecessary gimmicks. A mechanical Bosch P7100 injection pump fed fuel to 6 massive injectors, timed by gears instead of fragile belts or chains. The block and head were both cast iron, the crankshaft forged steel, and the pistons heavy-duty aluminum. You could run this thing on low-grade diesel, old cooking oil, or what felt like swamp water. It would still fire up. Cummins themselves had a million-mile club, and countless owners joined it. These engines routinely hit 500,000 to 1 million miles with only minor maintenance. Stories from the road tell of 6 BTS running 24 hours a day in tow rigs, snowplows, and farm trucks, barely ever shutting off. And they just kept going. One owner famously logged 1.2 million miles on the original engine before the truck's cab rusted off the frame. Beyond longevity, the 6BT had personality. That iconic diesel clatter at idle, the low-end grunt that felt unstoppable. It didn't scream, it just worked, endlessly, effortlessly, and with absolute confidence. Even decades later, clean 12-valve Cummins Rams sell for more than newer trucks. Tuners love them, farmers hoard them, and enthusiasts revere them as the last truly mechanical diesel ever built for a pickup. Number 3, Chevrolet Silverado, 5.7-liter TBI V8, 1987 to 1995. By the late 80s, the world was changing fast. Fuel injection was replacing carburetors, emissions laws were tightening, and engineers were starting to trade wrenches for laptops. But Chevrolet's 5.7-liter TBI V8, short for throttle body injection, proved that even in a digital age, simplicity still ruled. Under the hood of late 80s and early 90s Silverados and CK trucks, this small block was the perfect balance of old-school toughness and new-age reliability. It still had the same cast-iron heart as the classic 350, but GM gave it a modest tech upgrade. A twin-injector setup mounted over the throttle body. It wasn't fancy, but it made cold start smoother, fuel delivery more consistent, and maintenance dead simple. The 5.7 TBI made between 190 and 210 horsepower and roughly 300 pound-feet of torque, enough to tow, haul, and hustle without ever feeling strained. But what made it special wasn't the power, it was that it never gave up. Owners called it the last honest Chevy V8, an engine you could beat on, neglect, and still count on every morning. Its simplicity was its armor. No complex multi-point injection systems, no fragile sensors or high-strung electronics. The TBI system could handle dirty fuel, bad gas, and even the occasional missed oil change. If something did fail, you didn't need a diagnostic computer, just a socket set and a Saturday afternoon. Many of these engines easily cleared 400,000 miles on original internals. Fleet trucks ran them until the bodies rusted out, and backyard mechanics kept resurrecting them with junkyard parts. That's the magic of the 5.7 TBI. It wasn't just easy to fix, it was worth fixing. Number 2, Ford F-Series, 300 inline-six, 1965 to 1996. Before horsepower wars and twin turbos, there was an era when torque and toughness were all that mattered, and no engine embodied that better than Ford's 300 cubic inch inline-six, the power plant so reliable it became myth, folklore, and mechanical gospel all at once. Introduced in 1965, the 300 wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but it was the kind of engine that could run on 3 cylinders and still get you home. It produced between 115 and 150 horsepower, depending on the year and carb setup, but the real story was its 260 pound-feet of torque, all available just off idle. This wasn't a rev-happy motor, it was a tractor engine in a pickup body. What made it indestructible was its design philosophy. Build it heavy, keep it simple, and never stress it. The block was cast iron so thick it could survive boring and rebuilding multiple times. The crankshaft was supported by 7 main bearings. Most 6 cylinders only had 4. The connecting rods were massive. Every moving part looked like it came off a piece of farm machinery. And that's exactly how people used it. Farmers loved it, mechanics swore by it, fleet operators called it the forever motor. It powered everything from F100s and F150s to E-Series vans, industrial generators, and even forklifts. This thing would idle all day without overheating, pull like a diesel, and survive decades of outright neglect. You could overheat it, run it low on oil, or use it as a winch motor. It didn't care. It would just keep thumping along with that slow, steady hum that every Ford guy knows by heart. Even after it was finally retired in 1996, the 300 inline-six kept a loyal following. Many engines from the 70s and 80s are still running strong today, with compression numbers that would embarrass newer motors. Some owners report 500,000 miles on the original block, never rebuilt. Number 1, Toyota Land Cruiser, 4.5 liters 1FZ inline-six, 1992 to 2007. If there's such a thing as mechanical immortality, this is it. The 4.5-liter 1FZ wasn't built to impress. It was built to survive the impossible. Under the hood of the 80 series Toyota Land Cruiser, this engine carried soldiers, explorers, and families across every continent on Earth. Deserts, jungles, mountains, war zones, you name it, the 1FZ has been there and come back without complaint. Introduced in 1992, it was Toyota's answer to one question: what's the most bulletproof gasoline engine we can build? The result was a straight-six masterpiece, dual overhead cams, 24 valves, and a cast-iron block with an aluminum head, combining strength with precision. It produced around 212 to 240 horsepower and 275 to 300 pound-feet of torque, depending on market and tuning. But the secret to its longevity wasn't power, it was over-engineering. Everything about the 1FZ was built with ridiculous tolerances. thick cylinder walls, a forged steel crankshaft, heavy connecting rods, a gear-driven oil pump that ensured constant lubrication even when the truck was nearly vertical on a trail. It used timing chains instead of belts, eliminating one of the biggest failure points in long-distance engines.